Giles. Thank you so much for allowing me to come. I think I wanted to know, I invited myself. I saw you were meeting here in York. I've managed to rearrange my diary to be here. I can't be here all day, I'm here for a little while. And I said to Marcus, I just want to come. I'd love to have an opportunity to say hello, but I chiefly wanted to come just to try to demonstrate really what Father Marcus has just said, that I believe we all want the same thing. I've never had a problem. I was ordained as a priest when I was 25, and I do the math. That meant I was started training when I was 22. You know, I've given my life to the service of the gospel through the Church of England. And I've had the great privilege, when I was a parish priest, of seeing that church grow and see people come to faith in Jesus Christ, and see the church make a difference in that community where we serve. Of seeing people discover vocations to ministry themselves. So I absolutely believe in parish ministry. I absolutely want the church in every locality to thrive. I absolutely believe that the best way to save a parish is to grow the church. The best way to grow the church is to preach the gospel. The best way to preach the gospel is to live a life which is centered on Christ. And therefore, although you may have some misgivings about some aspects of the so-called vision and strategy of the Church of England, I am not going to apologise for saying that I believe what really matters in our church is a spiritual and theological renewal around our life in Christ. And if we led more Christ-like lives, then we would see our churches flourish. Of course, there are loads of other questions, and I'm sure that's what we'll focus on. Of course, there are. But I come to you, I'm the Archbishop of York. Who gives a monkey's about that? I come to you as a brother in Christ, wanting to share the gospel, live the gospel, and wanting to serve the church. And I despair, and I know that if I've ever been guilty of it, I apologise, but I despair when we are at each other's throats. Of course we will disagree, of course we will. We must disagree robustly, but also graciously. And my hope in being here today is that, well, let's have a much better conversation, because we need each other, and we need each other's insights and critiques, because, well, we face huge challenges in the church at the moment, and those challenges affect not just the Church of England, the whole of Europe. The tectonic plates of our culture have shifted. The moorings of our culture in the Christian tradition have been unloosed. And that's why it has to be a theological as well as a spiritual renewal about what is the Christian narrative, how does it shape lives, how does it shape the world, and how is it lived out in our parishes, chaplaincies, and other expressions of local church. I believe we want the same thing. I think there will be some disagreement about how we get there. I hope that we will come to learn how much we need each other and start valuing and appreciating one another. Some people have said to me, you come into the Lion's Den. It doesn't actually feel like that to me. Many of you are friends, people I know well, and are next to new friends. It doesn't feel like that to me. If I did have an analogy in my mind, it was a bit more like when I was a parish priest, we had a summer fete each year, and there was a stocks in the vicarage garden, and people would take it in turns, and people would throw little sponges at them. And the vicar always had to do like a half-hour slot, and that was when you made the most money. So if you've got some wet sponges, throw away, and I will do my best to answer you honestly. I will answer you honestly, believing that together we can revive our church.
So, Archbishop, we haven't been going here. We've got thousands of supporters. We had to stop people coming today, so we ended up seats here. There is a strong feeling about what we're talking about. And if you're somebody in a small village church in Lincolnshire struggling to keep a roof on, you know what this is like, isn't it? But what you just said something that sort of bothered me, a little bit bothered me. You said, if we therefore Christ-like lives, we would see our parishes flourish. Now, I think if you are a church warden in a place that's really struggling, and you feel a bit unattended to by the diocese and the powers that be, that can sound like, it can sound like it's your fault. You're just not being religious. And actually, people are giving very sacrificially. And I think that's why there's a real sense of passion and, dare I say, anger about statements like that. Because people are trying incredibly hard. And they don't always feel listened to or attended to by the centre. Is that unfair?
No, your basic point is entirely fair, and I can see that it could be heard. That doesn't stop it being true. If you look at the growth of the church in every age, it usually flows out of a renewal of prayer, a renewal of the pursuit of holiness. It doesn't come from strategic initiatives. It comes from Christ-like lives. So I can only speak for myself. I've been a bishop now 18 years. That's a long time. And it has always been a priority of my ministry to get alongside and to get to know the parishes I serve. I know I will fail. There's a lot of parishes. There's a lot of parishes. But I am, I will say, I'm reasonably confident that when you build good relationships with people, then they won't hear it as criticism. They'll hear it as an encouragement. Of course, often I will be pointing to the holy lives of holy people in those churches, not just keeping the show running, but for actually helping it to flourish. Because the reality is that many of our parishes aren't flourishing. Not enough. We want every parish to flourish. I could take you to parishes here in this Diocese of York, and some of the clergy are here, I won't embarrass them. Perhaps I will. Go to James Parish. It's amazing what's happening in that parish under his oversight. But I can also take you to ones that are really, really, really struggling and wondering what's going to happen next. And that's really tough.
Archbishop, you're an enigma to me because he spent a day in my old parish. We're wandering around, and I know that I know your passion for the parish. I understand that. But when you just said a moment ago, the kingdom doesn't come through strategy documents and all this. But one of the things that also, this is why you puzzle me, if I may say that. One of the things I also have alongside that is that you also are somebody who's associated, increasingly so, with vision and strategy documents and that thing we in the same parish called the Wheel of Death, which is all of that sort of stuff. And that feels like sort of something done by people who've done a sort of half-assed MBA, that's what I really understand.
Well, you can accuse me of many things, but I've never done
Will you forgive me for that? I'm just trying to work out.
I should probably carry on being an enigma to you, because, what is my field of expertise, if I have one at all? I would say I'm fundamentally a priest. So, word and sacrament are the only tools of my trade. I wouldn't get expertise in anything else. So, the vision, so this is how I see it, the vision for the Church of England, it's the most obvious thing one could say about the Church, to renew our life in Christ. It's only what every Christian minister has been saying and doing, from Pentecost onwards. Then we have a number of priorities at the moment that we think are the ways in which we invite. It isn't a top-down thing with strategies coming from the top. It's an invitation to dioceses and parishes to say, we think that focusing on, for instance, children, families, young people, schools. The General Synod of the Church of England has passed so many motions
was actually looking at them yesterday. So many motions saying we want to put more resources into children, young people, families, schools. But they've never been acted on.
I'm really sorry, can you speak up?
Oh, I beg your sorry. I beg your pardon. So, we forgot to move the microphone. We'll get a bit nearer. We'll hump it down. So, the General Synod of the Church of England has passed many motions over the years asking for resource to be put in to work with children, families, young people, of course our schools. Often they've not been acted upon. I think one of the misunderstandings about the vision and strategy is that somehow these things arrived out of thin air, or indeed that I wrote it. What I with others were doing were drawing together some of the big themes of our church and our synod over many years to say, if we do have some money available, which we do, thank goodness, we have the gift of the money through the church commissioners, let's spend it on the things that parishes and dioceses and the synod are asking for. So in the York diocese, we recently did a survey of all our parishes to say, what would you like help on? Okay, we asked them and said, what we've got some money at the centre, not a lot. We've got some money at the centre in this diocese to support you. What would you like us to spend it on? Overwhelmingly, it was on children and young people. Help us share the gospel with the next generation. Help us to do work with children and families. And that's what we're trying to do.
Because what we hear quite a lot is that people want priests. And that priest numbers are being cut. And that anxiety, there is an anxiety that the centre of gravity is shifting away. I suppose that's why we think the parish is something that needs saving. That as clergy numbers are being cut and parishes are becoming more and more amalgamated and bigger, and that there's more and more people around the diocesan photocopier doing jobs that we don't understand. And this creates a sort of crisis of trust.
Let me address that. So first of all, let me be clear. I want there to be more priests. No caveats, no qualifications. I want there to be more priests. I look back to my 10 years as Bishop of Chelmsford, which I loved. I poured my heart into that diocese. I can't tell you how much I love that diocese and those parishes. I still find myself dreaming about them. I've been gone 2 years. But lots of the things we tried to do to revitalise the church didn't work, and we were a very poor diocese with no historic reserves. We had to make really painful decisions which nobody wants to make. But if you're responsible as the diocesan bishop for paying the stipend of all the clergy and you just haven't got the money to do it, all I can tell you is tough. But please don't think that anybody who makes these decisions wants to make them. However, there was one thing which I'm really proud of, that while I was there, the numbers of those coming forward for ordination absolutely rocketed. In my first year there, we ordained 13 new deacons. In my final year there, we ordained 34 new deacons, and we ordained over 30 for 4 years running. So, I want to be absolutely clear, we need more priests. Where they are stipendial priests, we have to pay for them, and that's, I think, where the real challenge comes. And I would ask people to have sympathy, particularly with the poor dioceses, and up here in the north, there's, I can tell you, it's really hard. So most dioceses that I know of, certainly up here, and certainly when I was in Chelmsford, we did everything we could to pay for the stipendiary clergy. But sometimes it's not possible.
I understand that anxiety. Thank goodness I'm not a bishop and have to worry about it. So again, that's what keeps you up at night. I understand it. But one of the things that many people here would just want you to just address a little bit further is this idea that the centre seems to be growing as the decline in numbers of priests
I get it.
seems to be happening.
I get it.
That is a...
Yeah, I get it. And I didn't address that in the question. So first of all, yes, I get that. I think I know you know this, but let me remind you: the Church of England isn't one organisation that's run from the centre, and a lot of people seem to often treat it as if it is. I am not in charge of the Northern Province of the Church of England. I'm its pastor. The Church of England is run by the 42 separate dioceses. So when people make these claims, I don't want to say, well, if you look at the diocese, you will find actually quite a lot of variety from one diocese to another about how much is actually spent at the centre. All I can say is when I was Bishop of Chelmsford, we did not spend 1 penny from parish share on central resource. Not 1 penny. All the money that was on the central resource was paid for from some of the few historic investments we had. So there was never a call on parish share, not once. And then the other thing to say is, this may sound like an excuse, but people need to know how it is. There are some things that if you want to have a parish, and if you want to have a parish priest, you're going to need a housing department of some sort to look after the parsonage houses, otherwise they fall to the parish. You're going to need some basic infrastructure. Most dioceses, I think, know that you actually do need an archdeacon. And whereas a diocese often can survive a dodgy bishop, get a dodgy archdeacon, often really does collapse. So in order to have a parish system, you need a certain amount of infrastructure. So I think there are some things which are simply essential if you're going to be able to run a decent parish. And I think most people get that. Secondly, there's things which are mandatory. I mean, the biggest one is safeguarding at the moment. And again, I hope people can understand that the Church of England has been deeply shamed and humbled by our failures in safeguarding. And so we find ourselves in a position where we simply have to do this. We have to be compliant, rightly so, to put our house in order. Then there's a third category. So there's the essential things that you just need to run, like you've got to have a diocesan registrar. We're run by Canon law. You haven't got choices over this. You've got to have a housing department. You've got to have a safeguarding department. If you've got schools, you have by law to have a diocesan board of education. There's things you have to have. And I don't think anyone is seriously suggesting we get rid of that, because that really would lead to the collapse of the parish system. I think you're talking about the other things that dioceses have, which is a proportion of what's spent at the centre, and then I think you have to ask legitimate questions.
What's like 8 media officers in the Diocese of Oxford, something like that. I mean, this does feel slightly different.
Well, I'm not going to comment, Charles, on other dioceses.
But you understand what that's what this is coming from.
But I'll tell you, I will speak about the diocese where I've served, where there's 1 media officer and a part-time assistant who's an intern type person. And there's a parish in this diocese last year. I won't say which one it is because I don't want the poor parish priest to get more adverse publicity. There's a parish in this diocese last year who, can you believe it? They were proposing to put up a statue of the Queen, in the reordering their building, putting up a statue of the Queen, alongside some other women of the 20th and 21st century, women like Amy Johnson and a few. They were having these statues. Because one of them was, I can't even remember who it was, one of them was deemed to be a vaguely controversial figure. Suddenly the Daily Mail were all over this parish, accusing the vicar of being some sort of woke warrior. I can tell you, the church wardens and the parish priests were very glad when a communications officer could go over there and talk them through and help them deal with what was a little media feeding frenzy. So, yeah, it's a legitimate question to say, should we have these people? But it's not fair to say these people, are kind of useless. I know you're not saying that, but
I'm talking about the balance. I'm talking about the balance that exists.
Charles, I'm not disagreeing with you.
And we might have got the balance wrong.
In some dioceses we might have done. I'm not trying to duck the question. You quote a number to me. I'm not suggesting you've made it up. But I don't know what's happening in that diocese.
So and maybe that's true, maybe it's not true, but you know what you know where this is coming from.
But I think I will defend the diocese where I've served. And all of that is under the scrutiny of the diocesan synod. It's not, the diocesan synod every year can scrutinise the accounts. In fact, in this diocese, we're doing a review of our central services for precisely this reason, because, well, you may not believe me, but this is honestly how I look at it.
I'm asking a question, so let's try and get a dialogue.
Let me say this is, as a bishop, this is how I've tried to be. We serve in this diocese some of the poorest communities in this land, particularly in Middlesbrough and some parts of Ireland. Communities where there is, frightening poverty, where parish priests are doing the most amazing work alongside others who are supporting that community. I need to go to that parish. I need to look in the eye at every member of those congregations who's putting their couple of quid to the plate each week sacrificially. Their widow's mite is much bigger than many millionaires' millions. I need to look in the eye and say, here in this diocese, we are spending that money that you give us for a single purpose, which is to support the work of the gospel through the church, which is mainly parishes. There's actually a few chaplains as well. I prize chaplaincy, which we have more of it. But I need to look them in the eye and say that. And that's my test.
We have 42 dioceses, 120 bishops or something like that. That's not simple, humble, and bolder.
I'm I think it's well known that I'm who came up with the phrase simple, humble, and bolder, but that was me. I will own that. That was me. That is what I long for: a simpler church, a humbler church, and a bolder church. And those words have actually landed quite well. And I am very, very open to discussing those issues. But we need to discuss them rather than, score points off each other.
I understand.
I think you'd be hard pressed to find a bishop in the Church of England who doesn't agree with you on that. But if you forgive me putting it this way, simplification is a very complex matter.
No,
you can't just wake up one day and get rid of a diocese, And as soon as you do, I'm going to score a cheap point here, Fraser.
Go on.
What we'll do is on the 3rd of August this year, we'll have a Save the Diocese movement. Because that is what happens. When we tried to create a new Diocese of Leeds, everybody manned the barricades to say don't do it. So that's why we need to talk together about this and find a common mind. But I'm agreeing with you that I think we should simplify the Church of England, but don't pretend that that's an easy thing.
I wanted to push. My instinct is to push as much of the sort of money and the power down to the ground as we can. I know that's
my instinct's the same.
Yeah, no. But here's the problem, and I feel it. But when you sort of have parts of the Church of England where there are things called parishes, there are actually deaneries, and there's signs of deaneries, and you've got one person looking after this sort of an area that used to be a deanery. That's not a parish, is it? I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I do know what you mean.
It's not a parish. It's not the way we recognise parishes.
I do know what you mean. So, the reason, as I understand it, that that's come about isn't because somebody thinks it's a good idea to do it that way. It's because there isn't the resource to put priests into parishes. Well, there isn't even the priests available. So, I look at it this way. How are we going to go forward? I'm going to try to put it as simply as I can. How are we going to move forward as a church? Well, I think we've got several choices. One choice to prevent what you've described.
Because you want to prevent that. You want to prevent that.
Yeah, I do. But I think most bishops.
Does it feel slightly ideological?
No, but I don't think it is. I honestly don't think it is. I may be wrong. I don't think any bishop wants that. So how do you prevent it? Well, one answer would be to close churches. You know, which is something I know you yourself have argued for in the past. Just close the churches.
Yeah.
I don't agree with that.
No, I think wrong.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. Close the churches. But that would be one answer. So there's just one church left and one vicar. I think that's just a recipe for, you know, we last person out to switch out the lights. So that would work. Another solution, which is the one we're doing, is you make the parishes bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's what we're currently, not all dioceses, but some dioceses have done. I think there's a third answer. And the third answer is to what I would call do ministry differently. And I think it's the do ministry differently that the Church of England has been exploring with some success and some failure over the last 10 or 15 years. So let me talk about a good example, because I could show you many bad examples, but a good example would be a multi-parish benefice where there's one stipendiary priest, but in each of the parishes there's either what's called a focal minister, or a lay reader, or a self-supporting priest. And it was precisely that strategy that we were working on in Chelmsford, which is why we had such a huge increase in vocations, because I just got round, you know, I went on the stump, as it were, and got round saying to deanery meetings to say, look, the choices are simple. We haven't got the money to put a vicar into every parish. We just haven't got it. If you give us the money, that's what I'll do. I've got to find the vocations. But we haven't got the money to do that. I don't want to close churches, okay? I don't want to close churches, but I don't want to carry on making the parishes bigger and bigger and bigger either. Therefore, the only thing I can do...
They're not really parishes, are they?
No, they're not really
Exactly.
parishes. I'm not doing that anymore. So what I do, but I don't want to close the churches either. So, I think, let's go down the road of doing ministry differently. And I don't think the Church of England has always been very clear about saying, this is what we're trying to do. Because what it does mean then, is that yes, the job of the parish priest has changed. It's become a much more obvious job, which is half of the job anyway. But it's not the priest pretending to be the vicar of 14 churches charging around. Each church has its own ministry, and the parish priest has more of an oversight role than perhaps would have been the case. But you know, receive the cure of souls, which is yours and mine. You know, let's not be overly romantic about being a parish priest. Parish priests have always been about sharing in the episcopacy.
I mean, one of the arguments that you're returning to again and again is the argument about money, which I understand.
Yeah.
But I mean, we're minted, aren't we?
We are. We've got a lot of money. Yes, we've got a lot of money.
And how do those go together?
Well, we have got a lot of money, but we haven't got enough to fund the whole ministry of the Church of England. If we did start using the money to fund the whole ministry of the Church of England, it would run out. I don't know the math, but it's not difficult to work out. This is when it runs out. So yeah.
But we are getting a situation where the central, they do terribly well on the stock exchange. There's more and more coming on central. And yet, at the same time as that seems to be going up, it seems to be drying, the money seems to be not getting down to...
Well, I don't think that's entirely fair right now, because we've just announced, an unprecedented increase in the money that's going to be available. And let's be clear, that money is available to dioceses and parishes.
Will it be available to all parishes? I mean, because there has been some talk in some dioceses saying, small and quote-unquote failing parishes, you're not really allowed to bid for that sort of money. And
no, because I need to put before this sentence as I understand it, because I'm not in charge of how this money is distributed. Again, I'm really happy to come here and take your questions, but what I'm not prepared to do is be treated as if I'm the leader who's in charge of this, because I'm not. But as I understand it, and again I'll talk about the York diocese, we're preparing a bid. Our bid is focused on the transformation of the parishes that are struggling the most. That's what our bid is focused on. Particularly in places like Hull and Middlesbrough, but also where there's a lot of rural poverty, particularly in some of the coastal strip. So that's what our bid is focused on. Now, I can't tell you about what other people's bids are focused on, but we want to try to use some of this money to transform parishes that are struggling. And that will involve putting priests into parishes. I mean, in some places, not rocket science. What do we mean by transforming parishes? We mean we haven't got money to pay for those priests. In fact, worse than that, we're struggling to pay for the priests we have got. So this will be very helpful for us to, we believe, transform the parishes which are struggling. We may fail, but that's what we're going to try to do. And that's open to every diocese to apply. And again, I agree with you, I wish there was more money available, but and I think we need a big conversation with ourselves about the whole notion of intergenerational equity. So there was this idea, the synod members may be aware of, that we've got a pot of money and this generation was handed on intact to the next generation. It's an honourable principle, but what it misses is, we may end up, the Church of England itself has collapsed, but we're very, very wealthy. And so actually I think intergenerational equity shouldn't just be seen in economic terms, it should be seen in terms of the ecology and ecosystem of the whole church. So therefore I think there is an argument to say we could dig into but that's a debate which I'm encouraging, and I encourage synod members to have this debate again. I think it'd be hard pressed to find a bishop who disagreed. Honestly. And speaking personally, I would like more money to go to the low income community fund. That our poorest parishes need help.
Can I just ask you one more question before we come to the floor? Well, one of the anxieties, I'm just going to say it straight because it's just rather than try and make it euphemistic. But one of the anxieties that people have is that the way in which the system is designed at the moment, whatever that is.
Do you mean the system of distributing the money?
Distributing money.
Yeah.
Okay. It favours a particular sort of churchmanship.
Yeah.
It favours a particular sort of evangelical Christianity. And it is, in a sense, a subtle way of shifting the centre of gravity theologically in the Church of England. So we become HTP.
Yeah. Okay, so...
this is going to name it. That's the anxiety.
Yes, I mean... You don't have heard, Giles, so...
What?
I've never been accused of
I don't know.
I've been accused of many things in my life, but never an evangelical.
But you understand the so it's always people, overhead projected churches that get the SDF funding.
I honestly believe, well, two things. First of all, I think if you actually examine how the money is spent, you will find that you are massively exaggerating. Massively. I'm going to. There's another cheap shot. So where's Sam McGinnis? He's not here. Sam McGinnis.
Corner of Father.
Here you are. Sorry, Sam. I'm going to take your name. Not in vain. Now, Sam, a brilliant young priest who I had the honour of ordaining, very involved in this movement, he would not have served his title on the Deccan estate outside Loughton, an impoverished bit of West Essex, without an SDF fund grant. That's how his curacy was paid for. Loughton is not an HTB church, okay? It's an Anglo-Catholic church. So, yes, it can be argued that, I can see how people have the fear that you have, and of course it's not without some substance. But it simply isn't fair or true to say that's how all the money was spent. But more importantly, we have, you're a bit out of date. We have very definitely changed that.
I'm a long way out of date.
Yeah, no, but we've definitely changed that. If you look at, which I think Stephen Parish actually welcomed, which I was very heartened to see, welcomed, obviously, of course you also said, I think, Marcus, we want to see the detail, of course you do. But when the latest round of triennial funding was announced a few weeks ago, notably and significantly in an Anglo-Catholic deprived parish in Doncaster, And we went there on purpose to demonstrate, I thought, hopefully demonstrate there's a bit of a change going on here. First of all, this money is available to the diocese to work out with their parishes and their deaneries what they need to revitalise their parishes and develop their ministry. If that means in a rural diocese you need money for rural churches, great. If in an urban diocese you need money for that. This is much more now led by the diocese and the parishes, not by a central group who may have a particular idea about what a successful, flourishing church looks like. Though, as I say, even then, it wasn't ever entirely fair. And
how are we going to sort this trust business out?
Well,
because there is an issue. I've never known.
Yeah, nor have I.
I've never known a situation where there has been this level of lack of trust between the centre and the.
I've never known it before. No, and I despair of it. I hate it. And there are days when I get up and say, Lord, why have you called me to be the Archbishop of York? I'm not clever enough, I'm not strong enough, I'm certainly not holy enough. Because all I can say to you is, I will get things wrong, I will sometimes say the wrong thing, and I try to apologise when I do, but I am telling you what's on my heart, that I believe that the way we want to distribute, in this case, the way we want to distribute this money now is not going to be ideologically led. It's not. Or at least if it is, I don't want to be.
Well, the bishops. So, one of the things you've said is that actually, there is that sort of subsidiarity where bishops in their own diocese get to run this, and they may be more ideologically led than you.
Well, I can only speak here for myself and the diocese I serve, but I think there are many examples of where dioceses have used that money, such as. We actually funded, was it 12 kiosks, Sam? I can't remember. We funded a load of, because we had this, the thing is, we had all these locations coming through, and we couldn't pay for them. So we put in an SDF funded bid to pay for cures, to put into parishes where we knew if we put another priest in there, we could see some growth and transformation. And of course, not everyone worked out well, but many of them did. So that's just as much SDF as a so-called resource church.
I'm going to go and just work with you.
Is
that okay?
That's fine.
So let's just, Dan has been standing here with his hand up for ages. So Dan, can I give you the microphone to see if this works? Can I just ask a general point about people? We've got very limited time. I don't want to speak to you. Just want a short-term question, please.
So, Archbishop, I hear what you're saying, that you don't have overall responsibility for this, but I'm sure you have some influence over the way that the Church Commissioner's money is spent.
Yeah.
In fact, our money. So in my deanery, we've been told that we have 3.5 stipendiary clergy to cover the whole of the deanery, and yet we have now 12 full-time people in our vision and strategy department in the diocese, and we have full-time area deans. Is that an appropriate balance?
You'll forgive me, without knowing the detail of how that works, it simply wouldn't be appropriate for me to say. But I think you're in the Diocese of Manchester, and certainly when I was talking to, I think is it Rachel Mann, I think might be one of the full-time area deans, she was speaking so positively about how that was working. But I can't comment beyond that.
I have to say it is hard if the Archbishop doesn't know the particular places, so it'd be good if they'd be kept a little bit more general.
Archbishop, my name is Rory McDermott, I'm a church warden. Giles' first question hit the nail on the head for my particular situation, and thank you, Giles. We haven't had a stipendiary priest in our group of 6 churches for a very long time. We have, however, had a church for duty priest who sadly got COVID and had to give up her job. That House for Duty has been funded by our parish share very successfully, and we can continue to fund it. We have, however, been told categorically we are not to do that. As a result, we have withheld our parish share, and we will appoint a new priest of our own if necessary.
Susan Turner, church warden from Hampshire. Can you explain the rationale behind creating large benefices when we're trying to be an eco-friendly church? We've been without a parish priest for 3 years or so, and yet 22 ordained ministers have been made redundant in our diocese.
We just do this last one.
Yeah.
Thank you. A comment on the trust question. Of the 11,000 rural parishes, how many people were involved? 66% of the parishes in the country. How many people from those churches were involved in the consultation which you undertook? I think it was 2019-20.
These are quite specific.
Yeah, so take the last one first. How many people? I'm afraid I don't want to mislead you, so I don't have the exact figure at my fingertips, but it ran into the hundreds. But I'm afraid I could find out, but it's a very large number. Sorry, Tom. I think the question about the multi-parish benefits. I think Giles and I had a long discussion about that. I don't believe large multi-parish benefices are, in most cases I don't think that's the answer. When they happen, they're born of necessity. But I think there's another way of doing it, which is the way I was describing, which gives, and indeed House of Duty priests can be a very important part of that. I'm going to use the phrase, I know you hate it, mixed ecology, where different ways of providing ministry and doing church coexist within a benefice. That's what I believe will be a viable, a sustainable, a flourishing way forward.
These large benefices are...
Can I just, I'm sorry, we need to do it through there, otherwise people won't up here, sorry.
Archbishop Stephen, General Synod. I've been arguing for second with what you said about the need to have central services to support clergy. They are essential. Is it essential to have 42 of everything?
Yeah. Well, again, I think I answered that question, that this is something that I think we need to look at, but we need to look at it together and perhaps stop thinking that, as I said, I think it's hard to find anybody who doesn't think we should look at that. But it's not going to be easy to look at it. And if you were on Synod, if you've been on Synod for some time and have seen, the struggles that it took to create the Diocese of Leeds, this is not an easy thing to do, and it's very time-consuming, and even doing it is very expensive. So I'm in favour of that, let me be very clear. And we now have a new chair of the Diocese Commission who has experience in Parliament from the reorganisation of local government. Let the reader understand, we're putting people in place who can help us. But again, I would plead for us having, joined up conversations about what we can achieve and a realistic timescale about how or when we can achieve it.
Archbishop Roy Faulkner from Leicester. Let's just be honest about figures. If we put all of these extra 300 million that the Archbishop's Council has agreed to give us into all the dioceses, spread it out evenly, that would give us enough money over the period 2023 to 25 to fund an extra 40 stipendiary priests. How does this work against the situation for diocese? How does this square with the situation of Leicester, where they are proposing to cut the number of priests from 100 to 60?
Well, again, forgive me, I'm not going to comment on individual dioceses, I will comment on York, and I've said we are preparing a bid which will use that money to put priests into parishes, looking particularly at the areas where parishes are struggling the most. And I imagine other dioceses will do the same.
Archbishop, you said that when you were forced to cut the number of clergy in Chelmsford, that this was essentially forced upon you because of the financial situation. The situation in Chelmsford, along with a number of other dioceses, was exacerbated by the abolition of the Dale formula, which was then the money from which was then spent on the Strategic Development Fund. We've just had the Choke report, which has shown that the Strategic Development Fund, which earmarked £176 million of spending, has been a catastrophic failure, bringing in somewhere between 12 and 13,000 people instead of the expected 89,000 people. Would you not have rather that that money had just been put directly into stipends and that we could have funded parish ministry at its basic level?
I think it's a really good question, Marcus, and I think there can't be many people in the Church of England who know more than me about how we may manage the transition out of Dartmoor. I mean, I won't go into detail, not least because my successor is now having to deal with that. I just want to be clear. I have never made a priest redundant. Just to be absolutely clear, that has never happened. Some posts had to be saved, but that's not the same as making somebody redundant. And thankfully, I've never had to do that. I hope I never will have to do that. Having said that, I don't believe going back to Darlow is the answer. I think I said earlier, I would like us to, if perhaps in the next triennium, to put more money into low-income support, which is kind of, as it were, the sum of Darlow in terms of just putting money into parishes. But because I believe the long-term answer, if you'll forgive me using my shorthand, is doing ministry differently way forward. I think it's good for us to use that money strategically. I believe that lessons have been learned from the reports you mentioned, and we're already seeing that in the very different way in which money is being distributed in this next triennium.
Jeff Ifant from St James in Great Haydock, the Diocese of Liverpool. We are a Catholic parish, and for us, the Eucharist, the Mass, or whatever you want to call it, is right at the centre of our faith. And it is from the Mass that we gain the strength to go out and do mission. Without a priest, no Mass. And another point I'd like to make is that when people are in crisis, when people are dying, or whatever, they want the vicar. Mr. Smith round the corner, who's part of the pastoral team, might be a very nice person and do a very good job. But when people are in real crisis, they want the vicar.
Of course they do. And I've been a vicar, and there's quite a number of vicars in the room. And I'm confident that most of them would say that however many priests you have, that there comes a point where what most vicars are doing is trying to build up the ministry of the whole people of God. And so, of course we need priests in parishes, of course we need more priests, and of course we need priests for the administration of the sacraments. But let's not lose hold of our first principles, which is our baptismal identity. And it's through our baptism that we're members of the body of Christ. All of us have a responsibility for mission and ministry in the church. And I want us to be a church where pastoral care is shared, and indeed ministry is shared by everyone. And the the job of the priest, as I say in most licensing services, the job of the priest is not to do all the ministry. The job of the priest is to make sure the ministry is done. It is a role of oversight. And that's why we call a priest a shepherd. That's why in the autumn we call a priest a steward. Because right at the heart of priesthood is the overseeing and enabling and animating of the ministry of the whole people of God. So I'm not kind of disagreeing with you, but I think it is important to put that in a wider pastoral and theological context.
Neil Hanson, General Synod, recently elected to the Diocese Commission, for which I thank any STP members here who voted for me. As you know, Archbishop, a great deal of the work of the Diocese Commission consists in receiving well-prepared supplications for the filling of suffragan sees. You said earlier that the vast majority of your brothers and sisters in the episcopate were looking to be simpler, humbler and bolder. Should we look at much lighter agendas as they all decide they don't really need them after all?
Well, no. I think I don't think the big challenges we face are going to be just in the same way that most of the questions I'm hearing from the floor are coming from a despair, which I understand and share, about what I call the salami slicing of the ministry in the Church of England. So, if I don't know if any of you have ever played knockout whist, but in knockout whist, every time the cards are dealt, you get one less. I think that's how it feels in the Church of England. All I'm saying is, this isn't some nasty conspiracy from the top. This is because the Church of England's been in decline for a long while. And we face in many, many dioceses, there are a few well-endowed dioceses, most are not. Most are really struggling. So, we've ended up salami slicing. I want that to stop. But I don't think that's not the way to save the parish. But equally, if you want there to be a different sort of episcopate and different sort of structure in the Church of England, the answer isn't to cut a bishop here, cut a bishop there. We need to have a plan so that we're looking at it as a whole. And I think there is an argument to be had for saying we need to look at whether the current pattern is the right one.
Welcome, Archbishop. It's wonderful to have you here this afternoon.
Thank you.
And it's always a delight to hear you speaking positively about our parishes and the parish system. My name's Robert McNeill Wilson. I'm Church Warden, member of the General Synod and the Sacred Parish. The National Churches Trust recent report, The Good House, revealed that the churches and the parish church system yields benefits to the community and social benefits annually of a staggering £55 billion. That's before, obviously, the most important thing, which is the spiritual benefit. £55 billion for basically probably this expenditure of £1 billion is a far better return than anything else on which we're spending our money in the Church of England. And just to build on Marcus's point and take it a bit further, surely it must be possible, and what is stopping us from within Synod, when you bring the spending papers to us, actually legislating to make it a requirement that money is spent directly to the parishes? And I'll help you with the answer. I don't believe there's any.
Well, no, I don't agree with you entirely, because the vast majority will be spent in the parishes, but there are other legitimate things that the Church of England does. The most obvious example would be chaplaincy.
But does it give you a same return? That's a staggering return.
Well, I think it does. Yeah. I was bishop of, my first episcopal appointment was as Bishop of Reading, which had Sandhurst. And this was at the time of the Afghanistan and Iraq war. And I often used to go to Sandhurst. And the reason I often went there was because I was confirming young men who were graduating from Sandhurst and going into the front line of war zones. So the chaplain, who was doing an amazing job there of sharing the Christian faith with them, I'm not going to put a pound sign on the benefit of that, but don't tell me there wasn't a benefit to that. So, can I make a plea to you? My plea to you is, I think you will be taken way more seriously if you did two things. One is say, yeah, there are some real things we disagree with about the so-called vision and strategy, but there are some things we like, and that we want to support them and we want to make them better. Which might be, I don't know, might be the focus on schools and children and families, I don't know. But just as I don't want people to rubbish the Save the Parish movement, and I will, if I hear it, I will challenge it, I want to say to you, don't rubbish what that isn't fair. But the other thing I say to you is, one of the other ways to save the parish is to pay attention to the whole ecosystem of the church. Many vocations come out of chaplaincy. University chaplains, school chaplains, army chaplains, hospital chaplains, prison chaplains. I ordain more people who came to faith through those routes than I do through parish routes. So when we talk about a mixed ecology church, what we're just saying, all that means is the church is an ecosystem and it will flourish when every bit of it flourishes, but the largest bit is the parish. And that will remain so, and that is where, I was Bishop of Chelmsford, we had an annual budget from memory, it was about 20 million. Over 18 million went on parish ministry. That is where most money is going. It's a fantasy to think there's a lot in the diocese that can be used elsewhere, but let's work together to make sure that we can all look in the eye of the people who put the money in the plate and say, we are using it to share the gospel and build the kingdom through the church.
Archbishop Stephen, thank you, Matt, for coming and doing this. It was a tough gig for the Archbishop to come here and to face anger and disappointment and all the things that I'm speaking personally, but I believe passionately in Save the Parish, but I think we must not be defined by our anger and our disappointment. And it's a very good thing to come here and hear the Archbishop of York talk, and I think passionately talk, about the situation we're in. I have to say, I wish we had these sorts of conversations in General Synod, because it's very good to have them. It's very good to have them here. So, can I just say thank you for giving us the time.
If you can bear to, and if it won't entirely destroy your street cred, please think of me as a friend. I would like to finish by offering a prayer. And perhaps a blessing. I know I'm going, but it's what bishops do. Loving God, we thank you so much for the many blessings that you give us in Christ, and for our fellowship within the household of your church. We ask that you will come by your Spirit to encourage and equip us in our mission and ministry, to save and revitalise the parishes of this land, and to help the Church of England fulfil its vocation to be the church for everyone, everywhere. And where we have got things wrong, we are truly sorry. And where we have spoken ill of one another, we seek opportunities to make amends. And we pledge ourselves in your service to work together for the building of your kingdom, and so that Jesus may be made known. For we ask this in his name. Amen. And may the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit be upon you and remain with you always. Amen. Giles, as ever, thank you so much. Marcus, thank you. Bless you, sisters.